Welcome to the Investor Coaching Show, a podcast to help you get an insider's view of the financial world and escape common investment traps. We look at the financial news of the day and help you make sense of it so you can relax about money. And here's your host, Paul Winkler.
And welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. I'm Paul Winkler, talking the world of money and investing. And feels like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood today because we had Ira Work pop in, and now we have Chad Henson popping in. Didn't Mr. Rogers always had the guys that people from the neighborhood would just pop in on him, and that was what the show was?
Yeah, I think so. I was
because I didn't really watch.
I didn't really watch it a lot either, and I was little.
Wasn't it on like PBS or something?
Yeah,
like
it was
that?
on PBS.
I see. There was a family in the neighborhood that they would watch it all the time, and they watched Sesame Street. And the only time I ever saw any of that kind of stuff was when I was at their house.
Right.
Dad was a doc, and Mom was a stay-at-home mom, and they had three, kids, and they, they would religiously watch that stuff. So I kind of got a little bit of it, but
Yeah, I never watched a lot of it either. So
good wholesome stuff. But anyway, Chad's popping in the neighborhood. So what are we going to talk about, man?
Whatever you want to talk about now.
Oh, no, don't do that to me.
So I thought one thing that we could hit is...
I was picking on Matt Murphy this week, and we were just joking around about he had the show where he had no prep whatsoever. And I said, I relate to that, man. Now, we always have stuff to talk about, but anyway, yeah.
I think, one of the hot topics right now is what's going on with markets. We had the big run up at the end of...
Why? What's going on with markets?
Yeah, I don't know.
Anything going on with markets?
Do you watch it every day? I don't watch it every day, but no, it's our job to kind of keep up with it so that, when a client calls,
we do it so you don't
ask
have
a question, we don't, look like we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah,
but,
very true.
But 2023, it started off great, then kind of leveled out, and then finished with a boom. And then so far this year in 24, it's kind of been, a downward trend. Just kind of hearing some rumblings and everything, which I think you do a lot of times the first of the year, every year. So
yeah, you'll get back and forth. You know what we ought to do now that you're mentioning you decided to start talking about the market? Why don't we just there was a question that came in.
Okay.
And if you've got a question, you can always ask paulwinkler.com/question, or you go to the website, the radio show section, and you can actually ask questions there, and we can handle it here on the show. But the question that came in from Stan was, I said, enjoyed your topics about Roth conversions. Want to see what you think about this one. In one of the shows, you commented about how it doesn't seem to matter who gets elected, that our investments still have gone up in value. I'm thinking the reason may be because the huge spending bills that get passed when Democrats get elected. Biden passed huge spending bills, and so did Obama. And you also had a point about how the government could get road taxes with electric cars. I think the government will mandate the car report how many miles. Okay, so let's do that one second. This is a totally separate question, actually. The first one, markets going up under Democrats. What's your answer? And I'll throw my stuff in, Chad.
It really doesn't matter. I mean, when you look at it historically, whether it's Republican president or Democratic president, I think the vast majority, maybe with the exception of one president, that the market finished higher after 4 years than it started.
There have not been many entire presidencies where markets did not go higher. You look back at Hoover. And Hoover, took it on the chin in the 1930s with the Great Depression.
Yeah, there wasn't anything he could do about that.
And that was Republican.
Right. But, you look throughout history, and certainly, our lives may change, independently or as a whole, the things that we deal with and all. But, I try to separate it and look at, markets are made up of companies, and companies have one purpose out there, and, believe it or not, it's
a
not
profit.
to make the next best thing that you can't live without. It's to make a profit, and if you can't,
And that's how they make the profit, is making the next best thing that you can't live without. But, generally to make a profit.
Yeah. And the number one job of a CEO is to be profitable for the shareholders.
Okay, so why the perception that markets will go down under Democrats? Well, typically the reason is that increased regulation is the concern. And anytime you increase regulation, you will increase a bottom line expense of the company. And that bottom line expense would be abiding by the new regulation that is going to be coming out, right?
Sure.
The second reason being the possibility of increased taxes. Let's go back to the first one. When you increase regulation, and you have actually, you not only impose that new regulation on the corporations, but you also impose it on the public. That actually creates an opportunity for the company to make more money. Why? Because when catalytic converters were something that everybody had to have, what did you have to eventually do?
You had to eventually abide by the emission laws and have a catalytic converter.
Exactly. You had to buy a vehicle with a catalytic converter in it. When you have new regulations that make you do certain things, then those companies are going to have to come out with new products because the old products are no longer, and it may be even forced on you by sunsetting of that product altogether.
Yeah, it wasn't even just talking about the catalytic converters. It wasn't just GM, Ford, Chrysler, whoever making the car that benefited from that. It also opened up opportunities for other companies. Who's going to make the catalytic converter? GM didn't make it. Some company, some supplier made it for them.
Right. Now, I am holding up in front of my microphone right here something that I use an awful lot, and I'm sure a lot of you use. It happens to be an Apple iPhone. Okay? Now, what is it about the Apple iPhone that has changed in the most recent iteration? And the answer would be how you charge it. It has a USB-C. Now, who was it that forced Apple to adopt the USB-C as the way of charging and the way of getting data off of the phone? It was none other than a foreign government. It wasn't even the U.S. government. So therefore, what happened is a government regulation actually created an opportunity for me to have to buy all new USB-C cords and all these adapters for all kinds of things. It makes me crazy, but I got to buy them, right?
Yeah. Now you have a drawer full of lightning cords that aren't useful at all.
Yeah, exactly. So we look at that and we go, oh, yeah, they could force that. New technology, taxation, it may be that a company says, hey, there's new taxation, but then they will find ways around it. And a lot of times they end up pushing that off to somebody else. And then, what happens is then when they push that taxation off, and all of a sudden, now you have inflation and costs going up for other consumers. That can actually increase the sales of companies because of inflation. And then you might have a situation where, you think about inflation, how the effects can be. Now, hyperinflation nobody likes. But if you have some inflation, then the sales costs go up and then the revenue goes up from that. But the company's not really paying the taxes. The end person is paying those taxes. And then you can have a situation where more money is flowing in and people have to buy things, and that creates more demand for products. And then it creates more sales revenue. Because inflation is something that, if we look at it, as I always say, why do stocks protect us from inflation? So what's inflation? Prices going up. Who's raising prices? Companies. So you can have, that's another reason, if it is in a more inflationary regime, let's say, then all of a sudden there's more money floating around for one reason or another. Maybe it could be because of an increase in money supply and increase in debt. Now, in this particular email, I'm thinking aloud through this because he's talking about how they actually printed more money and increasing the amount of money supply. And because they've printed more money and they have huge spending bills and there's more money supply, then that tends to be inflationary. But that's not just Democrats either, because you look at Congress as well. Even during Reagan, you had huge increases in spending.
Sure.
But that was, we had to go and make sure we built up our military, is what they did. So you can have the companies that actually provide these products to the government, under Democrats or Republican, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud through that, and they both benefited from that. Let's say that you have a substitution effect that takes place. I'm thinking of another thing that could happen. A substitution effect would be you're typically buying this one product, but because of inflation, you can't afford that product anymore. And if you're a really well-diversified investor, you may have stocks in your portfolio in smaller companies or less well-known companies producing the substituting products that actually go up in value significantly.
Right. Yeah.
That's a possibility.
Definitely.
There is, of course, expenses. I mean, what do companies do to reduce expenses?
So the number one thing people think of always, and what we've been hearing a lot in the news in 23 and the start of 24, is laying off, layoffs. Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting that, read an article here that was from Morning Brew, but it's the first 14 days into the new year, 46 tech companies have had layoffs totaling 7,500 people. And so, we're 14 days in and the layoffs are continuing. A lot of people look at that as, well, that's a bad sign for the economy. Well, maybe, maybe not. A lot of companies are restructuring. But, if you're an investor and a long-term investor, it's the company is restructuring. What are they trying to do? They're trying to get their earnings back up. Because
there's a big investment company that just went through that shall remain nameless.
Yeah.
That actually had a huge reduction in business. And what are they doing? They're laying off a large number of people.
Yeah.
It's exactly what they do.
Yeah, it's no different than if you owned a business yourself and you weren't making money at it. You've got, how do you make money? One, you either increase your sales, or two, you cut your cost.
Your purpose as a company is not to provide jobs. Your purpose is to provide an income. Another one that gives me, if you look at, let's say, a change in political leadership, and then all of a sudden you have Exxon, who ends up out of favor to some extent because of this push toward electric vehicles. A different industry starts to develop as a result of it, because they're forcing people into owning things. Well, we could make an argument that a lot of people don't feel like owning.
Right.
There is some issue with that. But when you run a company like Exxon, what did Exxon basically do when a new administration came in that was not as friendly to them? They stopped putting money into exploration.
Yeah, that's another thing that you're seeing a lot of this year, and predictions, which we don't get into predictions, but predictions for 2024, are that some of the R&D development is going to increase, and some of the existing,
sure. Mm-hmm.
Some of the existing products may be more limited. Nike, for example, they're doing a full restructure. They're cutting $2 billion in the next 3 years. Only $460 million of that is layoffs. So you've got $1.5 billion that they're doing in restructuring the business.
So we look at that restructuring the R&D, and they're putting money into, in some areas, they're putting it into research and development for future business that
and
they're
then they're
going to
streamlining other areas of their business.
And the tax advantages that have been being talked about as far as accelerating that could be something that either party could do based on just going, we got to get something going for this next election. We got to give some reason for somebody to reelect us. So a lot of times in the very last year before an election, you'll see politicians go into high gear trying to do things that are favorable to corporations.
Right.
If we look at the ExxonMobil, I pulled up an article right here. It says ExxonMobil cuts billions in capital spending as oil and gas prices remain low. Now, that can be one of the reasons. The prices are low, so they basically go, we're not going to spend any money, or because maybe that there is some restriction in using these types of products. But either way, the company is was looking at removing gas projects from its plans in Appalachia, in the Rocky Mountains, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Canada, and Argentina. So they're cutting spending, they're slashing, as they say, capital expenditures between $16 billion and $19 billion. And that's down significantly from what it was in 2020. So this is something a company will do to get back to profitability. They're going to do whatever they've got to do to become profitable. And, when we have new regimes that come in, Republican, Democrat, another thing that I've talked about before is this issue of, do you as an investor, and it probably bears repeating, do you as an investor perceive that there's more risk to your money when there is somebody that is hands-off, letting companies do what they want to do, or when they are more hands-on, trying to control companies? Which one seems to be more risky?
I think it really depends on what party you lie with. Where your focus is, what your belief system is and everything. I think that's where a lot of the risk, the perceived risk comes from. Now, from a logical standpoint,
if you're a pure capitalist, less regulation, obviously. There you go. Thank you. So you look at that and you go less regulation, lower taxes. That means, or if there's a possibility that more regulation could come, that could be, for me as a company, a greater risk out there. And as an investor, being a logical person, what would you do if, or in the face of that increased level of risk? You would say, I need more return.
Return, yeah.
Well, what happens is you need more return, and then prices go down in anticipation that that level of risk could increase. Then when the political party is in power, then all of a sudden, that is when stock prices go up, because if historically, if we look at this, we go, okay, the return has been higher when there is more perceived risk. And this goes back a couple thousand years, and maybe not a bad idea for me to just bring this back up, but the Venetian Prestiti, which was a bond that we actually have data going back 2,000 years. And what we know is that at the height of the Roman Empire, when people felt the most secure, that is when the Venetian Prestiti, the return, was its lowest. When people felt less secure, the return was actually increased. Why? Because investors demand more return when there's more risk. So there are a lot of moving pieces to this. I mean, we didn't even exhaust it here, but there are a lot of reasons. We can look at it and go, okay, the new regulations force us to come out with new products. Well, now we get to sell new stuff to you. The old stuff doesn't work anymore, or the old stuff is going to be... And a lot of times what I've seen, it's funny because they come out with new stuff and they go, oh, well, we can't use the old technology. And they come out with new stuff that's actually pretty good.
Right. Yeah.
Because companies are pretty innovative and people are pretty innovative. Companies run by people. They come out with things that end up being pretty doggone good. And, they stumble around a little bit. You'll have situations where you move to a new technology, and for a while, there was... Their technology is not necessarily terribly useful, but then somebody brings in another element and it all of a sudden works.
Sure. An example right now going on is like the VR headsets.
Okay.
They're very expensive, and what practical purpose do they have? But the technology is there. Sometimes the usefulness of a technology takes a while to catch up. How can you incorporate it into your everyday life?
That's a really good point. Because it's like Bill Gates comes out with a computer and his mom goes, Bill, why would anybody need a computer in their living room?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Thanks for tuning in to the Investor Coaching Podcast. Now, you may be one of these people that's been listening and realizing, wow, investing, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, and financial planning, tax laws constantly changing, and recognizing that maybe you might need some help in this area, but you don't want just anybody to help you out. So we have 10 offices in the Middle Tennessee area, and everything that we do is fee only. We align our interests with your interests. So you can get an initial 15-minute phone call with any one of our offices just by going to paulwinkler.com/call. That's it. Every one of the offices is run by somebody with 20 plus years experience. They're all degree planners. They all have academic backgrounds in investing, and you can get the help that you need. So if you want to set up a complimentary phone consultation, just go to paulwinkler.com/call. And we look forward to seeing you soon. So virtual reality headsets, what use might they have? There's a lot of people that can't afford to go on vacations. Can you be on vacation in some place like in Switzerland without having to?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the amazing thing about them is the immersiveness of it. I mean, it's, unlike watching a television, with a 70-inch screen,
I'm just thinking, is it really going to be that good? Okay, I don't know.
I don't know either. But
you'd be at the Super Bowl. No.
I don't know that it'll replace that, but
that can't be the same. That can't be the same. Yeah, it's to me that's interesting. Just where.
But where does that technology lead to? Does it lead to not only for an entertainment purpose, but on a business or corporate perspective? Is it easier to multitask? Items and things. While who knows what the concepts will be? That this can bring about.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see where that, because I really don't know much about it yet. I've seen some of the commercials like anybody else, but boy, it could be interesting. Could you point out how, Stan asks this, how the government would get road taxes with electric cars? I think the government will mandate that the car report how many miles you drive, or you're taxed by the mile. There was something, wasn't there some kind of a bill, and it was the registration
Yeah,
of the
seen
vehicle.
some.
Wasn't it something like that they, when you register an electric car, that there was a higher registration charge to pay for,
Right.
because you typically get a lot of the road improvements and fix-ups through your gas prices.
Yeah, the gas taxes.
And you got to somehow do that. Because I remember bringing it up one day, and then literally, lo and behold, it was a day later or 2 days later, something like that, an article showed up, and it was exactly what I had said on the radio, was that they're going to actually impose a tax for electric vehicles.
I mean, you can make the argument that, the gas tax is unfair because, I drive a pickup truck and gets 20 miles to a gallon. Somebody else is driving a small car, that gets 36 miles to a gallon. And so they're paying less into the road maintenance than I am.
Right. Yeah, and it isn't fair.
Yeah. So
So I just found legislation raises the cost to register and renew tags for electric vehicles from $100 to $200 from 2024 to 2025. Then it increases them to $274 by 2026. So, yeah, that was Tennessee TDOT. It actually talked about that. So that's one thing. Now, the number of miles that you drive, because you think about it, he's right. When you're buying gas, you pay more in taxes than that person that is driving fewer miles. Do they actually take your vehicle mileage and start to, I don't really get it, because I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. And I said, we were talking about the disposable nature of cars. I was like, because China has these cars and they're selling it for a song and the dance. And I said, well, shoot, the battery for the car is $20,000. And it was like $27,000 for the whole car. And I said, it's just going to be like disposable cars. And, it's like, well,
do you remember a car called the Yugo in the 80s? That was pretty much a disposable car.
That was a disposable car. Yeah, you didn't want to be caught in a traffic accident in one of those things.
Oh, no.
Not that you want to be caught in a traffic accident anyway, but that'd be even worse. Yeah, it's going to be, I guess the other possibility is because the charging. That's one of the thing is there some place at the charging station that you could actually have,
At charging stations, you certainly could, but how would you regulate it, in a residential setting? I mean, I guess you could add a tax onto the installation of, a charging unit at your home or the sale of a charging unit for your home.
Oh, that reminds me of, that's really interesting, Chad, because it reminds me of impact fees when you build a house.
Mm-hmm.
How
Right.
you have that, so they charge that. That's a possibility, certainly, right there. It's just I think that the creativity of our politicians and people, lawmakers,
At least when it comes to money.
when it comes to ways to tax us, you got it. I think it's endless, So I think they're going to be okay.
Yeah, they'll figure it out. We may not like it, but they'll figure it out.
Hey, this is Paul Winkler. Hope you enjoyed today's edition of the Investor Coaching Show. You want to learn more about what we do, go to our website, paulwinkler.com. You can watch some of the videos there, and if you're not already a client, you can set up a free initial consultation. Until next time, I'm Paul Winkler, reminding you that I believe that more educated investors are more confident investors, and confident investors are more successful investors. Have a great one. Advisory services offered through Paul Winkler, Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor. The opinions voiced and information provided in this material are for general informational purposes only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what investments are appropriate for you, please consult with a financial advisor. Paul Winkler, Inc. does not provide tax or legal advice. Please consult your tax or legal advisor regarding your particular situation.